For my food and culture project, I chose the Swedish pepparkakor cookie. So this food is meaningful to me because it's a Christmas tradition in my family. We make it every year on Christmas Eve. We use it as like our Santa cookies. It's a Swedish gingerbread cookie, or kind of like a ginger snap cookie. They're very thin and they taste like gingerbread, and they're popular in Sweden as well as Norway, but especially Sweden. We started making them because of another Christmas tradition where we would go to something called Old World Wisconsin, which is like a little Christmas event in southeast Wisconsin. And they have these kind of old-timey homes with different Christmas traditions of different European countries. So we went into the Swedish one, and they had a recipe for these cookies, and we've been making them ever since. So the cultural significance is that the pepparkakor, it directly translates to pepper cookie. So again, it's like a ginger snap cut out Christmas cookie, but they're more heavily spiced because there's pepper in the dough. Recipes date as far back as the 1300s, most commonly as a treat during fika, which is a midday coffee break. And they're often served with glögg, which is a mulled Swedish wine. But they became popular in December and associated with Christmas in the 1800s, and they're typically consumed in December now, although they are sometimes still a treat during fika. There is a tradition that if you place a pepparkakor in the palm of your hand and you make a wish while tapping the cookie right in the middle with either your index finger or your thumb of your opposite hand, and it breaks into 3 pieces, your wish will come true. And the dough can also be used to make a pepparkaksus. I have a little trouble pronouncing that, but it's basically a gingerbread house. Those ones aren't typically eaten. They're more of just a Christmas activity to do for fun. So this is definitely not a healthy food option. I found nutrition facts for a store-bought brand of Pepparkakor cookies and looked into my mom's recipe as well and kind of did the math, and it lined up pretty well with this. So they have about 140 calories per cookie, 5 grams of fat, which is not terrible, but considering that it doesn't offer really any micronutrients or protein or fiber to keep you full, it's not the healthiest option. It's also very high in carbohydrates, and most of those are added sugar, so they're not the healthiest calories. And it just doesn't have a lot of good nutrition for you for that amount of calories. So the way that you make these, this is my mom's recipe, and she titled them Santa cookies because we do always make them for Santa. So in a bowl, you put the butter and you save that for later. And then they're really fun to make. So in a saucepan, you heat up the sugar, molasses, and spices until they're boiling. Also, traditionally in Sweden, they use something called syrup, and it's like a special Swedish syrup. But in the US, we typically would just use molasses. And then once those ingredients are boiling, you stir in the baking soda and it kind of bubbles up and like fills up the whole pot. And once that happens, you pour it over the butter until the butter melts. Then you mix that all together, add an egg, and then add those dry ingredients like the flour. You have to knead it all together because it does get really thick. And then you chill it until it's firm so that you can roll it flat and cut it out. So they're typically very thin, crisp cookies, and you use a cookie cutter to make different fun shapes. I interviewed my mom for this recipe because she's typically the one that makes them. So I asked her, why is this dish culturally significant to you? And she said, because I love Christmas. We use this recipe for Santa cookies, and it's always been something I've done with my kids and now grandkids. Christmas is her favorite holiday, so anything related to Christmas she loves. I asked her, how has our family changed this recipe over time? She said, we frost them to decorate them for Santa, but in Sweden, they're not frosted or they just have a light glaze. The frosting we use doesn't taste good, but the gel is easy for the kids to decorate with. And so typically in Sweden, they don't actually frost the cookies, they just eat them plain. But we use like red and green gel frostings to decorate them as our Santa cookies. How often do we make this recipe? She said we usually just make these around Christmas time. I asked her, does baking these cookies make you feel connected to your heritage? And she said, your dad is Swedish and I'm Norwegian, and we didn't start making them till you were a kid. And so I don't feel a strong cultural connection to them. I associate them more with our family holiday traditions. For context, we're pretty heavily Scandinavian, but my mom's side is more Norwegian, my dad's side is more Swedish. And so most of what my mom makes is like American or recipes from her mom, so my grandma. But we started making these because we thought that it was cool that they were Swedish and that we're Swedish. But I am the youngest of four children, so they didn't come into our family until I was a child, and so a little bit later in our family history. Finally, I asked her, do you think this recipe is nutritious? And she said, no, they're cookies, so they're definitely a holiday treat, but the holidays are a time when people share traditional recipes, and whether they're healthy isn't really a concern on Christmas because it's one time a year. And that is all that I have. So thank you for listening.